Hello, and welcome back to Baby Elias's stories. We now return to Blade Runner 4, I and Talon by K.W. Jeter. Chapter 7. Ever use anything like this? Iris watched as the figure in front of her lifted the automatic rifle in both hands, as though he were trying to judge its weight. Once or twice, said Vogel. With a couple of quick manipulations, he snapped the folding barrel into place, pushed home the ammo clip, and thumbed off the safety. He raised the gun sight to his eye, aiming down the empty alley in which he and Iris stood. This thing calibrated? She knew he was showing off, displaying his familiarity with the hardware she had taken out of the metal cornered cases at their feet. You don't need it to be, she told him. Not at the ranges we're going to be working at. This isn't exactly a sniper operation we're talking about. All indoors, up close and personal. Vogel gave a wink. That's how I like it. Her own gaze rolled upward. What the hell am I doing? As far as Iris was concerned, the job was already out of control. Here she was, not only relying on possible flaky information, but on the flake who'd provided it as well. A good way, she told herself, to get killed. For all she knew, this Vogel character had no more heavy armaments experience than what he'd picked up from male adolescent target audience video feeds and game immersions. Soon as he pulled the trigger on what she'd equipped him with, he could be walking backward from the weapon's streaming recoil, lethally spraying everything in an expanding cone of fire, including herself. She'd be lucky to survive this operation, let alone retrieve an unshredded owl. As if her premonitions had somehow leaked out into the real world, an amplified burst of gunfire sounded from the other side of the alley wall. The ground floor of the building was an original Golden Era movie palace, with dust-shrouded, burnt-out chandeliers hanging in the lobby behind the shell-scrolled ticket booth, once red carpets worn through in widening patches to the concrete beneath, and stylized Art Deco murals under layers of grime and spray can placa, depicting Los Angeles as a paradise studded with oil wells and golden citrus fruit. Now the buzzing neon marquee advertised a 24-hour rota of cheap multi-patois Indonesian eye gougers. Half the audience, Iris knew, would be asleep, using the broken-hinged seats as flophouse bedding. Give me the layout again, said Iris. Slowly. Vogel had sketched a rough map in the alley's wet dirt, but she had already dismissed it from her mind. She preferred pure verbal input. How do we get upstairs? Easy. From above Vogel's brow, the drizzling rain darkened his close-cropped hair and trickled to the corner of his jaw. Service entrance, behind the projection booth. There's a stairway that goes up to the next floor, which is all vacated insurance and old theatrical agency offices. Next floor up from that is where our friends are keeping watch on the owl. The elevator shaft will bring us up right in the middle of the layout. What kind of alarms have they got rigged up? All thermal detection, keyed to normal human body temperature. Vogel nodded in admiration. Latest tech from Iblis Sicherheit Gesellschaft in Geneva, with full inductor-driven subsurface probe capability. Nice stuff. Yeah, it's nice. Nice and impossible to get past, said Iris. What were you planning on doing? Blowing out the electrical service to the building? Vogel shook his head. That wouldn't accomplish anything. They're running their gear on shielded isotope decay power generators. Military equipment. These guys have some real heavy-duty stuff, besides the guns they're toting. Even if we pumped a disruptor wave through the building, we couldn't shut them down. So all that cutting the power feed to the building would do is let them know we're on our way in. Then the job's over. Right now before we start. Iris looked at him in amazement. If we could sneak in there, we'd have little enough chance of pulling this off. Tripping the alarm circuits, we'd have zero chance. So we don't trip them. Leave them running and slide right past them. And how do you propose doing that? Simple. Letting the automatic rifle dangle at one side. Vogel reached with his other hand inside his coveralls. His fist came back out, extended toward Iris, then unfolded to the flat of his palm, turned upward. We use these. Iris looked at the two plain, unmarked gelatin capsules on his palm. Inside them she could see a granular white powder, not much different from the other white powder drugs she had seen before. She wasn't thrilled. What is it? Slow death. They all are, she thought, then caught herself. She realized he meant something specific. Wait a minute, said Iris. You're talking about Thermatos, Vogel smiled, one corner of his mouth lifting. A bastard coinage from Therm and Thanatos, meaning heat and death. A bastard word from an orphan compound, otherwise nameless, since the pharmaceutical lab that first invented it didn't want to even talk about it. There was a reason for that, Iris knew. Of all the cumulatively lethal, supposedly pleasurable chemicals ever on the street, this was the worst. Pleasure being a subjective concept. She had never seen the attraction of anything that lowered one's biological functions by stunning and cutting the brain's paleocortex, the mammalian buffer layer between the evolved higher-level new neocortex and the primitive reptilian brain core. Out of the central nervous system's gestalt. When Iris had been fresh out of LAPD basic training, and before she had managed to engineer her promotion to the Blade Runner division, she had gone along on a raid to clean out a nest of Thermatos addicts down in the Warren-like cribs of old Chinatown. They had been using the stuff for so long that the drugs shortcut integration between their reptile cerebral sections just above the brain stems that regulated the body's unconscious autonomic respiration and pulsatile actions, and the fully human parts just under the curved lids of their skulls was no longer temporary, but fused solid, synapse to synapse, neuron to neuron. Iris had had the sensation upon looking into their cold, unblinking eyes that the spaces behind the dark pinpoint pupils were no longer inhabited by anything human, but only by the usurping reptilian brain core itself. It had been like staring into a nest of vipers, real ones, not artfully crafted fakes, but with human faces and skin. It was no wonder then that the Thermatos compound had been made illegal, both in its manufacture and possession, and ruthlessly suppressed, at the same time that every other narcotic and stimulant was de facto available and even encouraged in LA. The authorities had enough trouble sorting out real human beings from fake ones. Replicants that had been full human from their inception date, without having to cope with people who had made themselves non-human. And worse, the inversion of the old Tyrell Corporation motto, more human than human. In the case of the Thermatos addicts, less human than even the replicants were, so that the human condition, the definition of being human, was no longer a binary matter. Yes or no, but something on a sliding scale, from way not human to very human at the other end. Which meant that the Blade Runners, the enforcers of that definition, were playing the averages when they did so. When they put a gun to somebody's head, they were grading on a bell curve. Passing the test meant you got to live for another term. Flunking was death, the collapse of the scale into a simple, terminal on-off state. Iris had wondered before, when remembering what the response would have been if anybody on the raid had slapped the void conf machine on one of the Thermatos users, whether the gauges would have lit up at all or the needles have moved from zero. And as the machine's little bellows pumped, had moved back and forth like a concertina playing a sad, silent waltz, sucking in and analyzing the test subjects' exhalations and sweat molecules, the cold-eyed creature on the other side of the table would have done the same, flicking out a thin, black-forked ribbon of a tongue, sniffing the air for traces of its prey, like even a phony snake did. "Where the hell did you get this?" Iris regarded with repugnance the two colorless capsules in Vogel's palm. "Nobody makes Thermatos anymore. It's a capital offense." "Old stock," said Vogel, "from when they did." "Great." Iris's voice soured with disgust. "On top of everything else, it's stale. Fresh enough, carefully preserved in a vacuum extraction decrypto chamber, like the corpses of dead rich people dipped in liquid nitrogen, awaiting the call, as in Bach's Cantata 140. Wachtet auf, rafft uns die Stimme. "Sleepers awake, but nobody wakes up from being dead," said Iris. "Which is what that stuff will do for you if you're caught with it." "Worth the risk." Vogel held the two pale capsules up between his thumb and forefinger. "Since these are what will make it possible for us to go cruising past the alarm systems up there." He nodded toward the building that formed one side of the alley. "Among the other, less desirable effects, Thermatos also has the useful physiological effect of slamming the normal human body temperature by about 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Those alarm systems our friends are using won't trigger on anything below 80 degrees, which means that we'll be effectively invisible to their security perimeter. Yeah, and we'd also be screwed up out of our minds and moving at about the speed of an iguana on an iceberg. I've seen what that stuff does to people and their reaction times. It's a perceptual dilation effect. Kiss your clock's internal and external goodbye. We get past the alarm systems fine, and then we'll be standing there like window display dummies, not even blinking while these people walk up and dismantle us at their leisure." "I share your concern," said Vogel with elaborate mock patience. which is why this stuff isn't straight thermatos. It's cut with a micro-encapsulated dosage of a high-powered niacinamide analog. Once the stuff is in your gut and the thermatos has kicked in, the niacinamide's thin film barrier is timed to evaporate exactly 5 minutes later. You'll feel the heat rush all over because the molecular load will already have dispersed throughout your body. That'll purge the thermatos effects, like flipping a switch, and you'll be ready to rock and roll. We both will, 'cause I'll be standing right next to you. Nice plan, Iris grudgingly admitted. Except for one thing. What's that? Down the line, after this job's over, if we survive it, what happens to me if I like the effects of this thermatos junk and I decide I want more of it? Then you're screwed, Vogel told her. There's a one-way avenue, sweetheart. That's a one-way avenue, sweetheart. Either you don't find a source for more of it and you suffer, or you do find a source and you suffer more. He turned his head slightly, regarding her from the corner of one eye. You're really concerned that you might enjoy being less than human? It's a concern. Some people dig it. Tell you what then, I'll make you a promise. He lifted the automatic rifle at his side. If it turns out later that you're screwed up from the stuff, I'll come around and put a bullet through your head and put you out of your misery. Deal? You're all heart, said Iris. I told you you'd be glad you ran into me. Iris looked at the capsules in the center of Vogel's extended palm. You know, I'm getting tired of people talking me into doing stuff, especially when I wind up doing it. She reached out and took one of the capsules. What the hell? She popped it into her mouth and ground the soft gelatin shell between her molars. Something gritty and stinging, like wind-sharpened ice crystals, spilling across her tongue. Let's go. No time like the present, said Vogel. He swallowed the remaining capsule, then knelt to fold up the automatic rifle and pack it into the open metal-cornered case, sitting on the pavement. Smiling, he stood up. Or no time at all. The thermatos kicked in as they were crossing the theater lobby. Iris felt the deep cellular impact that the long-term users called the glacier hit her in a cascading surge up her spinal column. Her free hand that wasn't toting the other weapon's case spasmed open. The torn red ticket stub fluttered and sped from her fingers toward the darkly stained carpeting, as though pulled by some new, urgent gravity. Everything in the lobby, human or not, instantly assumed a jittering, vaguely menace-filled animation as the optic processors behind her eyes shifted down to the red end of the available light spectrum. A small tribe of cinephile squatters, indoor pallid beneath their habitual dirt, their own eyes like lemurs' peering out at her and Vogel from the makeshift tents they had erected between the broken door of the men's room and the constantly trickling water fountain. Even their slow movements seemed frenetic and sharp to Iris, as her own kinetic functioning fell closer to absolute stasis. Only Vogel's motions as he strode alongside her steps seemed normal. The thermatos had hit him as well, putting him on the same long-wave temporal plane, with eyes half-lidded as though an inner herpetoid nature was manifesting itself on the angles of his face. He smiled and held up one hand, fingers spread apart to indicate the number of minutes he and Iris had to reach and break into the fortified area upstairs. Iris nodded. Something in her mouth, seeping from beneath her tongue, seemed to taste of both blood and metal, as the reptilian core at the center of her brain locked itself in a neural embrace with the higher thinking functions. I can see, the thought crystallized itself in a dark room inside her skull, why people get into this stuff. The blood in her veins seemed to transform into a crawling, numbing substance, closer and closer to freezing and eradicating all human pain. Better than any synthetic opiate, legal or illegal, that she had ever tried. Iris realized now that those had only obliviated the conscious and unconscious misery of the human and awakened condition by flooding those sharp rocks with an oceanic endorphin tide, whereas the Thermatos had dissolved the rocks at the bottom of the sea, deepened the lightless trench in which she sank to the extinguished core of her own being. That's how you get hooked, all right. Not by pleasure. The words moved slower in the icy corridors inside her skull, but by the true absence of pain. Even the metal cornered case, dangling from one hand as she walked through the theater lobby, felt like a vacuum-filled semblance of form, nothing with real mass inside, like the perceived apparitions of real human beings that she and Vogel shouldered their way past. Good shit for a Blade Runner, mused Iris. The stuff played right into the cold attitude needed for the job. She knew she could have opened the case, pulled out its airy toys, and stacked the lobby with leveled corpses without feeling a twinge of empathy. But that would mean... Pay attention. Vogel's words from some place outside of her sounded wavery and muffled, as though the air between them had congealed as well. We've got work to do. That I'm no different, her thoughts continued to move, slow and unstoppable, from what I hunt. And not much time, all a matter of degree. If the niacinamide analog goes off, grated Vogel, and we're still on the wrong side of the alarm system, we're screwed and dead. Iris swiveled her cold gaze toward him. Her tongue felt heavy and stiff in her mouth. Her jaws pried themselves open through the sheer force of her will. I don't care, she said flatly. I know you don't. That's the hit you took. Vogel's pupils were two black pinpricks, surrounded by ice blue. He had stopped and turned to face her. Look, you might think you're in some timeless zone, but you're not. His words took seemingly decades to arrive, one after another. The clock is ticking. Out there. He gestured toward the surrounding lobby and its press of impassively curious faces. So get with the program and let's get a move on. I'm not fetching the stupid bird for you all by myself. Vogel ducked his head so he could gaze straight into Iris's eyes. It's your job, remember? That one word stirred something to life inside her. as though it were awakening from hibernation beneath meter-thick ice floes. She nodded slowly. "All right, let's do it." With the metal cornered case weighing a little more in her hand, she shoved past Vogel and walked toward a door marked, beneath tangled layers of graffiti, "Employees only." When they reached the top of the bare concrete stairs, Iris heard the clatter of an ill-adjusted projection machine. The door to one side of the landing was open, a crack, enough for Iris to see the projectionist asleep in a wooden chair tilted back. His feet on top of the machine, the floor a foot deep in discarded snippets of film like segmented snakes, pressed flat and writhing. A flickering cone of light dined out of a small square hole in the far wall, resolved into black and white ghost images on the theater's sagging screen. Dead actors, a man and a woman Iris would have had no way of recognizing, were locked in the embrace that had probably killed them, over and over. "Here," Vogel nodded toward the elevator doors on the other side of the landing. "Come on! We're running behind!" Against the low thermal load of the thermatos in her system, Iris pushed into action. Standard police training enabled her to pry off the control panel, short out the wires, and bring the elevator down a few feet in its shaft. Sparks painlessly stung her hand as she cross-connected another pair of wires, pulled the elevator's dented doors apart. Lugging the metal cornered cases, she and Vogel scrambled up onto the elevator's exposed top. The doubled steel cables reached up to the machinery at the building's roof level. "If we use this thing," whispered Iris, "they'll hear it running." "Doesn't matter," Vogel shook his head. "The theater uses it all the time for clearing out the audience rubbish to the dumpsters in the basement. There must be 20 years of accumulated trash down there. Nobody pays to haul it away. So our friends are used to the sound of the elevator. It's background noise to them." The darkness of the elevator shaft, like an underground tunnel, turned on end and threaded through the building's vertical axis. Smelled like dust and long dead enclosed air. Iris closed her eyes for a moment, re-savoring the thermatos' glacial effect on her perceptions. Distant voices of the film being shown in the theater seeped into her consciousness, like pleasing reminders of all the human concerns it had been so gratifying to leave behind. A shed of skin with the unoccupied ghost of her own face printed on it. She felt as if she could have stayed there forever. "But you've got a job to do," it was her own voice nagging her this time instead of Vogel's. Maybe the thermatos was already wearing off, past its peak levels in her bloodstream. Without saying anything aloud, Iris knelt down and found the control box connections, a hand's breadth away from the steel cables. There was no playing with the wires necessary. The red up button was in plain view. She punched it, and the machinery above growled and clanked, rustily grinding the elevator toward the next floor. The push of the stop button brought the top of the elevator within a few easy inches of being level with the doors and the exposed mechanisms that would slide them apart. Vogel touched Iris on the shoulder. "Wait a minute." He took a small device from one of his coveralls pockets and flicked it on. A tiny round dome of a variable emissions LED pulsed red, then yellow, went dead, then pulsed back on as green. Perfect, said Vogel quietly. He slid the device back into his pocket. We're past the alarm perimeter. He smiled down at her, and it didn't go off. Iris stood up, keeping the toe of her boot ready on the door's control button. How's our time? About ready for the show. She felt a regretful premonition, as if the end of the stilled world of her perceptions was already in view. Being human wasn't pleasant to begin with. Going back to it, after even this brief a vacation, was bound to be painful. Vogel extracted and assembled the necessary gear from the metal cornered cases, then handed Iris her weapons. Here it comes, he said. The niacinamide analog hit her system like an internalized flamethrower, as the dispersed compound shed its time-delay polymers in a millisecond rush. Her heart pounded in her chest. For a dizzied moment, she wondered if the people on the other side of the elevator doors could hear its drum-like stroke, as a fevered heat boiled through her veins. Her mouth was sucked dry by the kiss of an invisible sun. The sweat coursed from her brow and stung salt into the corners of her eyes. Then it was over, body heat fading to a normal 98.6 degrees. The Thermatos' glacier was gone as well, melted away and revealing the once again human form it had so efficiently encased and numbed. She glanced over at Vogel. Even in the elevator shaft's darkness, his sharp, angled face seemed luminous with sweat. Vogel nodded toward the doors. Hit it, he said. Glad to. Action might distract her from the misery onslaught of the human condition. Iris stepped down on the control button. The machinery's various interlinked metal struts and rust-covered springs creaked into life. Drawing the doors apart, light spilled into the shaft from the spaces revealed on the other side. Good luck, in a way. The doors opened onto one of the figures she had viewed on the cobbled-together panel screen in the wreckage of the downed blimp. The man was walking past, automatic rifle slung by a strap over his shoulder, carrying a styrofoam cup filled with coffee from the hot plate and pot sitting on a folding card table against the far wall. Iris blinked away the sudden glare from the overhead exposed fluorescence, swung up her own rifle and nailed him. The obliterator, at the end of her automatic's barrel, tumesced for a split second, swelling to soak up the shot's sonic impact, then converting and releasing it as a few degrees of heat that rolled back along the barrel and gripped to her hands. Lukewarm coffee splashed across the cracked and scuffed linoleum as the corpse folded around itself and fell. Vogel and Iris stepped over the body into the corridor beyond the elevator doors. The map of the floor's layout that Vogel had drawn and described to her in the alley below flashed inside her head and superimposed itself upon the spaces around them. That way, whispered Vogel, pointing to one end of the corridor. She was already in motion, sliding her spine along the wall, the automatic's barrel braced vertical against her shoulder. Before she reached it, things went awry. The other man from the panel screen appeared behind her and Vogel, stepping out of the toilet facilities and zipping up his fly. Zip! He was faster than the first one had been, and able to dive and snatch up the rifle he'd left propped beside the toilet doorway. A quick brace of shots fanned down the center of the corridor, before Vogel's silenced bullet took off the corner of the man's head and sprawled him against the wall, marked red as he collapsed and slid down to the floor. That was as efficient an alarm as any other could have been. The audible shock wave of the dead man's fire and its slamming impact into the wall at the opposite end of the corridor was still echoing inside the space like fading seismic thunder as Iris tossed a smaller piece of her gear into the open doorway beside her. The long, sustained, notched spectrum glare grenade bounced into the center of the room, the same one that she had watched before on the panel screen. On its perch, the owl for which she had been hunting unfurled its wings as the blinding light shot against every surface, annihilating all visibility. A panicked screech sounded from the owl as it leapt futilely from the perch, the chain fastened to the metal band above its claws, tethering it from flight. The men in the room had similarly jumped to their feet, automatic rifles swinging toward the open doorway. Some of them had filtered goggles on, quickly pulled up over their eyes from where they had been hanging around their necks, ready for just such an assault. Iris and Vogel had brought their own optic filters into place as well, as soon as she had pulled the pin from the glare grenade. But unlike the goggles of the men in front of them, the LAPD devices were tuned to the specific shifting notch in the grenade's output. The untuned filters tried to lock onto the notch, but were too slow to catch up with its randomized, skittering pattern, which meant that the goggled men in the room were as blind as the bare-eyed ones. In the ensuing chaos, Iris could hear them cursing and barking futile orders to each other. A barrage of automatic rifle fire fanned through the doorway, wild enough to take out the man standing nearest to the door. Iris dove to the floor, beneath the hot tracer lines of the others as bullets, still standing, feet braced apart in the center of the corridor. Vogel returned fire with his own automatic, nailing two of the men in rapid order, sending them sprawling back towards the wall with the wooden perch shoved against it. The owl desperately flapped its wings to get away from the noise and light, but only managed to tug tight the chain fastened to its leg band. The two remaining men in the room, though still blinded by the glare grenade, swung their rifle muzzles in Vogel's direction, forcing him to break off and fall back against the wall near the doorway as their bullets rattled past. Flat on her elbows, Iris raised her rifle and took out one more with a quick burst. Brrrp! Before she could swing the muzzle around, the last one remaining leapt headlong in her direction, guided more by desperate instinct than anything else. His chest and shoulders pinned Iris's rifle against her body, the weapon trapped and useless as a broad hand shoved against the side of her face, bending her neck back to its snapping point. The man's fingers dislodged her goggles, and her sight was suddenly filled with white, annihilating light. Blackness welled in the center of that illumination. Then Iris felt the body go into a spasm of convulsions. Another rapid stitch of rifle fire tore through one side of his rib cage, the exit wounds within centimeters of her own flesh. The bullet ripping through the pocket and the lower sleeve section of her leatherite jacket, leaving them in singed tatters. Iris shoved the dead weight off herself. The room and the hallway had gone silent, except for the fizzing of the glare grenade, its photo-explosive charge finally expended. Able to see now without the goggles looped around her throat being necessary, she looked up and saw Vogel extending a hand toward her. "Come on!" Vogel pulled her to her feet. "We're not done yet. There's at least another two around here somewhere." "We'll deal with them on the way out." Iris picked up the metal cornered case she had left in the middle of the hallway, snapped it open, and extracted a set of less lethal objects. "First, let's get the merchandise we came for." In the room's stillness, the owl had settled down on its perch, the movements of its head, wide, golden eyes staring, were still hectic and jerky. "Take it easy," crooned Iris softly as she stepped over the bodies littering the floor. She drew on a pair of heavily padded gauntlets that extended past her elbows. "We'll be going to a nicer place now." The owl tried to escape from her as she reached for it, but the chain and leg band kept it within reach. Averting her face to avoid the blows of its powerful wings, Iris managed to get both her gloved hands upon its body, bringing it against her chest to pinion its desperate exertions. She got it under control. Or at least for a moment. "Give me a hand," she snapped at Vogel. The sense of a living creature straining to escape and survive was palpable even through the padding that encased her hands and forearms. She could even feel its tiny heart racing, the quivering of the terrified predator whose shadow had terrified even small creatures. The scything claws racked dangerously close to her stomach, the razor point of one almost snagging the cloth of her cowboy shirt. "Hurry up!" With his automatic rifle slung over his shoulder, Vogel stepped up with a wide elastic restraining band. The two of them struggled for a few moments with the animal, then at last managed to secure it, the band pressing its wings to its body. Iris slipped an oxygen-permeable bag over the owl, drawing its opening tight over the feet, rendering the claws safe for transportation. "Let's go." With one hand still in the heavy leather gauntlet, the owl tucked in the cradle of her forearm, Iris nodded toward the door. "Before whoever's left gets organized." Vogel preceded her, automatic rifle poised. He posted against the wall beside the doorway, peering cautiously out into the corridor. "Clear," he gestured with a tilt of his head. "Go for the elevator shaft, and I'll be right behind you." Her rifle's shoulder strap was long enough that Iris could keep it at her hip as she carried the bound owl with her other hand and forearm. Emerging from the room, she ducked down and sprinted straight for the open elevator doorway, a couple of meters farther down and opposite. Before she reached it, a brace of rifle shots crackled from the far end of the corridor. She didn't take time to see what door might have popped open and how many opponents were behind it. She launched herself toward the darkness of the elevator shaft, rolling her shoulder under her so that she would land on her back. The exposed metal protrusions on the top of the elevator car dug painfully into her spine. But with both arms wrapped protectively over the owl, she managed to keep it clutched safely against her chest. As she scrambled onto her knees, Iris heard more gunfire coming from both directions in the corridor outside the elevator doors. From well back in the open doorway, Iris peered out and saw Vogel with his back flattened against the opposite wall, pinned down by and returning the fire from the doorway at the end of the corridor. He saw her and gestured with a nod of his head. "Over there!" Vogel indicated the doorway from which the remaining men were firing. "You got a better angle. Push him back and I'll be able to make it to the elevator." A few more shots dug into the floor near him. "Then we'll be out of here." "Got a better idea," Iris called to him. "Thanks for the help, but I've got a job to finish." She reached behind and hit the down button on the elevator's control box. She heard more gunfire and Vogel shouting something after her as the elevator started down the shaft, leaving the open doorway above. The projectionist was still asleep in his booth when Iris climbed down with the bagged owl from the top of the elevator. So many cheap action flicks had played in the theater that the continuing sound of gunfire, barely muffled from the floor above, had merely seeped into his muddled dreams, which was also the case with the audience in the movie theater. When Iris reached the bottom of the service stairs and stepped out into the crowded lobby, no one was alarmed by the sounds, fainter here, coming from above. That kind of thing was as common in the real LA as it ever had been in the illusory film world. Then she was out in the street with the merchandise tucked against her chest, away from the night rain. Iris quickened her steps, heading for her own apartment rather than the police station.